being here with us, and also we've got some of our alumni on YouTube as well who's joining us via live stream. So guys in YouTube land, feel free to pose your questions and share your thoughts and your observations, and we'd love to hear from you guys as well. I'd like to firstly thank Fizu for letting us use their boardroom space. It's very generous, and I think all of us has this generous spirit where we want to give back, we want to help, we want to make an impact, which brings me hopefully very neatly to Peter Jin Hong, who's our speaker today, whose work focuses on inspiring the next generation of generosity at Google. He's a former marine biologist. He's an award-winning creative director. He's a user experience expert at Google. He's an explorer, traveler, wanderer, a well digger, and an investor in a better world. He's a new father and a very good friend. Please welcome Peter Hong.
Thank you. So that's actually the way, it was one of the most joyful experiences in the heart of Africa in Malawi. I was there with a nonprofit, and we were helping to deliver just the final parts of a well. And when we would drive into these rural communities, just the celebration, and they would ululate, and zikomo is how they say thank you in Chichewa, which is the language in Malawi. And it was a brand new experience for me to actually experience what ululating. So I kind of challenge you right now to ululate with me in this sort of commensurate joy for 6 seconds. It's a unique challenge, like I've done it with other audiences, and 6 seconds is quite profound. So I will count with this hand. Ready? On 3. 1, 2, 3. Very good. All right. Congratulate each other, because that was pretty awesome. So zikomo. So this was the experience, and another way they expressed gratitude was nkuku, which means please take our chickens. Which literally they would give us chickens to express their gratitude. They shared what they had. So the theme for this discussion was actually around brain hacking and gratitude. And so what you just did was an example of hacking your brain and behavior already. Turns out that just the pleasurable new experience of ululating, that new sensation that you might have not experienced before, like triggers different aspects of your brain because it's a new experience. Not only that, you did it together. So there's this social bonding and resilience, this almost group kind of exploration and slight embarrassment. It's just like karaoke that way. So hacking the brain is about discovering what are the triggers that are there. And so in terms of what I understand you're exploring, it's also about understanding larger organizations and the individuals within and what can inspire them. So brain and behavior hacking is about understanding the points that inspire us and how we're wired and the things that can change us. So turns out ululating and doing it as a group together also not only increases your oxygen flow, because like you're trying something new, you have to breathe in, it's a challenge. So there's an aspect of like fulfilling a puzzle or fulfilling a challenge. All these things actually help lower stress and ultimately extend your lives just a little bit. So that was my good deed to try and extend your lives in that aspect. So these components that I'm talking about is understood as gamification. And these longer lives, in terms of gamifying them, is something that another researcher is doing. Her name is Jane McGonigal. And she's exploring, through her understanding of the brain and game design, what are the things that actually excite us, promote us, and reduce our stress, increase our ability to bond with one another and collaborate with one another. So game design, turns out a lot I've learned about life is actually around game design. This particular photo of me is one of my favorites, primarily because it was taken in the western glacial fields of Iceland. And this particular moment was significant because we had gone through a great loss, some great grief. My partner Dana, we were alone in the glaciers, and then all these Icelandic horses surrounded her as if to console her. And it was the first time she smiled. And Dana's in my life because of a significant event. Years ago, I was freediving with whale sharks, and I was next to the photographer Sean Heinrich here, and that's me freediving underneath the whale sharks. But moments after this, I was freediving a little too deeply, and I got caught under 3 whale sharks, and I couldn't surface. And I exhaled air and inhaled water, and things started to go dark, and somehow I ended up floating to the surface. And it was at that point that I realized that I need to take a closer look at my life, and what can I do with everything that I've learned? What can I do? And a part of the promise to myself was to be honest and to lead a more honest life and a good life. And with that decision, Dana came into my life, and we've gone through some wonderful experiences and some tragic experiences and growth. But that aspect of darkness has brought us to another place. So what I just shared with you is also about me being vulnerable. And in a group culture, an expression of vulnerability is also something that can be very powerful, that lends the audience to sort of group together. And so that is about our ability to be empathetic, and it's a powerful ability for group mechanics. So I hacked you again, but in a way that it was full disclosure. This is something that I wanted to share. It is something that I felt would extend the positivity. So the very first photo that was up there, you're wondering why are these puppies, these wolf cubs on the screen? So neuroscientists, researchers in Tokyo have learned that when you see cute animals, that it again hacks your brain and hacks your behavior. That we are evolutionarily tuned to become more attentive, more focused when we're exposed to cute animals. So it was another design in the structure to say, I want you to pay attention to the next set of slides that are coming up. So in a way, these are the secrets of experience design, and these are the things that I've learned over time in my career through biology, through neuroscience, through advertising, and that I've been applying, and that have allowed me to harness like wonderful ability to create collaborative environments within the design studios that I've worked in and at Google. So the next time you see a YouTube video with cute animals or someone sends you baby photos, beware, your brain is being hacked. So I've had great mentors in my life, and similarly in this environment, it's about colleagues and coaches and those you can learn from. And for me, the best mentor in life has been life, because life's hard. And this was one of the wells in Malawi that we were digging, and I'm actually off in the distance grabbing a pipe from the truck. But it is extraordinary in an environment where you see where life is so hard and that you need to work hard. The water that came out of this well was so cold and so refreshing. And the woman's hands here, she's the matriarch of the village, so she took the first sip. But what was amazing was when life's hard, what I learned from the community was that you just celebrate harder, and they were oolaing, and they were celebrating. And so the theme that I wanted to share both here and tonight was about celebrating harder. And the alternative presentation that I was going to have was a cage fight, actually. And it's a cage fight versus the Terminator and Dalai Lama. And I was like, between these two, who do you think would win? Well, the answer is actually depends on which muscles you use. Now, I'm sure Arnold would say if you train hard enough, you could get muscles like these. And it's quite true. So, if you train hard enough, perhaps the Dalai Lama could also get muscles like these. But with the Dalai Lama, what happens if you're training the muscles of compassion? And so, could I have the muscles of compassion that the Dalai Lama has? Well, I would have to train really hard, but it's possible. So there's a region inside the brain that's actually similar to what we call the muscle for compassion. And if you were to just poke your finger in here and just wiggle, it's called the insula. You could actually just reach it, and if you could just massage that little muscle, that's one way to stroke your compassion. It was interesting because at Stanford, they had tried to study compassion, and they wired up all these Tibetan monks. And the Tibetan monks started laughing, and the researchers thought, oh, it's because you look so funny with this cap and all these wires coming in. And the Tibetan monks were laughing because they go, that's not where compassion is. Compassion is in the heart. Turns out they were both right. There's this incredible highway of nerves that go between the brain and the heart and wraps the heart. And this vagus nerve, it works sympathetically to actually increase compassion and express compassion. So there's that old anecdote where this network of nerves that surround the heart, it's the same set of cells that are in the brain. So it's essentially a second brain. And so if you ask a neuroscientist today, they will acknowledge the morphology of the cells. Yes, they are neural cells, but you can't actually think with the brain. But it's quite wondrous that we have these ancient anecdotes that says, like, decide with your heart. So this brings us to compassion. And I was working with another researcher at the Greater Good Center in Berkeley, and his name is Dr. Keltner. And we were looking at how we can encourage more and more compassion in the world, and the power that compassion can have. And he's renowned because he was also a key advisor to the Pixar film that came out, and about the emotions inside someone's head. And there's joy, there's envy, there's anger, there's fear, there's sadness. And the movie itself actually structured around how our brains work and how emotions work. And I asked him, so how do we increase compassion? And as the Tibetan monks know, you just meditate a lot. And I was like, well, that doesn't, for the rest of us, we can encourage that. And at Google, I'm sure we could try and encourage people to meditate, but that would be really hard. What else can we do? Turns out, if you can't meditate, just be generous, practice generosity. And it's another way of increasing and strengthening your compassion muscle. And turns out generosity is contagious, that we're social creatures. So when you see somebody yawn, and it's our empathetic response to just feel something for that person, which is the reason why we yawn. It's quite surprising. It's not that we're tired, it's because we want to show the other person we're with you. And so when you understand these social means and social norms, certainly in a group environment, an organization, or a team, what are these empathetic responses that we have for each other that make us want to strengthen one another? So generosity is one of those movements. It's one of those things that's very contagious. And generosity is a muscle. So if generosity is a muscle, and as you know, with training you can develop muscles. What can we do if we could offer an experience where we're not just training the body and the mind, but that we're training our generosity and compassion? If we have a more compassionate society, what is possible? So these are the questions I ask myself when I'm at Google and in life. And I have another part of the presentation where it's a preview of tonight's presentation, where I was going to go into a lot more of the aspects that I've learned throughout my career. But I also want to just respect people's time because we have a number of questions. Do you want me to go through it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So delight versus fear. So I started out as a biologist and moved on into a very number of careers. And I understood that a lot of people who've gone through the master's program have had careers already and have also given up a lot in order to go through the master's program. And I commend you because that's a very brave act. And I've also had to reorient in my career, and it's always been terrifying, and it's always been fruitful. So as in neuroscience, what you learn is ultimately the way we go through life is really dependent on delight and fear. They're the two strongest aspects of how we drive our behavior and emotion. So in 40 milliseconds, in the blink of an eye, we decide to do things. In 80 milliseconds, we decide to not do those things. It's 40 milliseconds is exactly the amount of time that your brain sends messages out to your body to enact something. And it's the round trip. It takes 40 milliseconds there, and as soon as you're about to do something, 40 milliseconds back before your brain says, And we learned that from a researcher who was designing a wheelchair that it can control with your mind. And it literally, they could not make it consistently do the thing that the person wanted it to do, but it could consistently detect when the person made a mistake because it was a large signal. It's like, I don't want to do that. 500 milliseconds is still the blink of an eye, is when we actually have our first impressions. And there was research that I did with Google, in 500 milliseconds, can someone determine whether the quality of a website is good or not, or going to have the sort of content that they were looking for? Can they predict things within the blink of an eye? Turns out they can. And it's not about, when you think about that, 500 milliseconds, everyone has that ability. In the blink of an eye, all of us have an ability to assess the situation. And so this comes down to aspects of micro-expressions. And what I learned was important in terms of whenever you're expressing something and talking to someone, if you're not genuine, you release micro-expressions. And so people know whether you're not somewhere, like you will always walk away feeling, I didn't feel quite right about that. Or if the experience is genuine, you feel energized by it. And so that's what's astounding. There's a famous film footage of this dinner party where all these people are just finishing dinner and they're talking about what do they do after. And so all these people are like offering suggestions, and then this person just offers a suggestion, and then everyone goes, yeah, let's do that. And that person who offered this suggestion was renowned for being the charismatic one and the leader. But when they slowed the footage down, they saw that even before that person spoke, that person had small micro-expressions in the way they moved their body, the way they moved their face, and in response, there were micro-expressions from the entire table of them suddenly pausing or turning or validating that individual prior to him even opening his mouth. And so this is the power of things that happen in a blink of a second. And this is what we have within us. So when you have a genuineness in your intent, and when you have a commitment to your ability, a commitment to each other, a commitment to the team, these are the things that without words are understood. So this is what's fascinating about us as human beings, that we have a power to communicate and to lead beyond what we have been learning through structured language. It's who we are. We need to embody everything we believe, and then we become efficient leaders and we become efficient communicators. And society, even a regular individual, can pick things up in 500 milliseconds. So the other thing I wanted to offer that helps develop who we are, and certainly helped develop me, is getting lost. So I want to tell you to get lost. Because it's strange that in losing yourself, sometimes you find yourself. There's a famous talk where someone's saying you should live in New York and leave before it makes you hard. You should live in San Francisco. But I also realize you should come to AISTS. Yes. It'll complete you, it'll fulfill you. Because it's exciting. Like, this experience has already introduced me to new possibilities and ideas and reacquainted me with old friends. There's an individual that I work with, John Bielenberg, and he runs a group called Project N, Mavericks. It's in Half Moon Bay in California. And his whole program is about thinking wrong. And throughout my career, we've followed similar ideas, but he runs a program around thinking wrong. And it's brilliant because whenever I hold brainstorms, so when we have clients in design agencies, or even when I hold brainstorms at Google, one of the first things I do is I have a brainstorm. But brainstorms are so hard. Classically, they are so hard because people are asked to perform. And then people also have performance anxiety. People are also wondering and jockeying for positions like, how should I do this? So the most challenging thing about brainstorming is to get people truly participating and feeling that they're equal. So the thing that I ask people to do in a brainstorm is whatever the theme or idea is or the goal, I say, think of the most stupid thing associated with this, or something that's funny, or something that's wrong. That's what we need to do. And what's fascinating is that it's so much easier when you come up with ideas that are bad. So the goal is to come up with bad ideas. And then no one can be judged for having an idea that they think might be all right, because our goal is to have bad ideas. And that equalizes everybody. And when you look at a wall of bad ideas, some of them turn out to be stupid, some of them turn out to be funny, and some of them are just very wrong. But what's amazing is for every one of those ideas, you just turn them 180 degrees. You ask yourself, what's the opposite of that stupid idea? What's the opposite of that really wrong idea? And they don't have to be opposites, but asking people to look at what the opposite is allowing them to have a springboard. You're capturing energy, because the energy to come up with a bad idea was so simple. The energy to come up with a novel idea is so hard. But when you take the springboard off the energy of an idea that already exists, we have an incredible ability to edit very efficiently. We can edit if we see something. We can all be critics, right? We can all be armchair coaches. So this is another human ability that we have. And if you allow people to feel empowered by the fact that it's like, okay, this I can do. And it also unifies us, because when you look at a wall of bad ideas, people start laughing together, people start talking more. And it's this encouragement of talking and communication that adds this lubricant for more possibility. And not only that, some of the ideas, as funny or wrong as they are, you don't even have to flip them 180 degrees sometimes. Sometimes you're just like, it's so wrong that it might be right. And humor bonds us. And it's one of the reasons why I think, certainly in sports culture, it's about the camaraderie through mutual celebrations or just hanging out, but like the humor can be very bonding. So it's one of the ways that you can capture good energy, especially in an environment where, like, how do we get through this together? And last night we were talking, and I wanted to throw this in because Twee said when she came here, she said she wanted to change and evolve the program in the best way she could by trying and failing as much as possible and then trying again. And that and said, maybe you shouldn't fail so much. But this is actually a key part of the startup culture. So working in the Bay Area, I see so many startups, and I myself helped create a startup and a venture capital fund to focus on social good and innovation. But the main theme has been, and what people live by, is to build, test, and iterate. And through this process, you learn. It's always about creating a prototype, always seeing what the possibility is. But you build, test, and iterate, which are the exact same words. So failing is not about failing. It's about exploring and seeing the possibilities. And in sport, there's an equal perspective. Like you plan, you play it out, and then you regroup. And so both in life, in sport, and in startup culture, this philosophy is powerful because the word fail is some things that I think that maybe society teaches us to fear, and this goes back to delight and fear. Fear is one of those primal aspects that drives us. Delight, oxytocin, dopamine, these are the neurochemicals that our brain produces, is actually the things that rewire our brain and make us learn. So fear is a natural response. It's supposed to be there. But delight is actually what makes us grow. It's what changes the brain. Funny thing about oxytocin and dopamine, sometimes, well, I'm sure the city, as beautiful as it is, you'll see a lot of it, like when you see young couples around, they're kissing and they can't stop kissing, and young couples in love. Turns out when you're in love, as well as when you have a baby, like smelling their head, you release oxytocin. And lovers release oxytocin from their lips. They're actually chemically addicted to one another, which is why they can't stop kissing one another. But oxytocin is one of those neurochemicals that allow us to increase our bonds with one another. It also relaxes the wiring in our brain because we're about to adopt a new person in our life. And so we need to rewire our brain. So failing is not a word that we should fear. Failing is a perspective and a philosophy that we should adopt. So through understanding and testing boundaries, we learn what we need to change. And so the funny thing is, when we realize or feel like we've tried anything and there's no more options, it's quite the opposite, because the brain changes. And when you give your brain the challenge of like, I've tried everything, your brain does something extraordinary, and that's when you become truly creative. And so creativity happens when you get lost. It's the reason why they say you should get lost. When you wander a new city, your survival instincts kick in. And so you're not using the traditional shortcuts that your brain has already created. When you're not using the shortcuts anymore, you're using new parts of your brain. When you're using new parts of your brain, that's when cross-pollination happens and you become more creative. So the creative options sometimes happen when we're at the very last resort. So there are ways to encourage it. Part of it is to get lost. How are we doing that time? 15 minutes, okay. Fulfillment versus happiness. So there were some questions around fulfillment versus happiness. It's interesting, there's been so many studies on happiness. And there was a question on happiness, and maybe I'll take an opportunity to quickly answer that. What is happiness, and can we always be happy? Have you ever heard of the Silva method training? If yes, what do you think about it? So I hadn't heard about the Silva method training. I looked it up, and it is a training program where it's more about mindfulness and conscientiousness, and then developing your ability through different exercises to just engage more of your ability to be happy, as well as engage extended parts. So I haven't heard of the Silva method. They were also talking about increasing your intellect to the level where you could have ESP. I don't know about that. I would love it if that were true. But most studies on happiness are very interesting because no matter what the culture is, there seems to be several norms and ideas on what can lead towards the idea of happiness. But what the research shows is that happiness can be quite elusive and quite transitory. But the thing that is more associated with happiness, when we talk about happiness is fulfillment, which is a different experience. So by experiences, not things. Through the research I've experienced, as well as more recent articles that have come out, there's a recommendation that, hey, you should buy experiences, not things. And so the reason for that is something called the generosity curve, or what I understand is the generosity curve. Back to dopamine and pleasure. When we dream about that thing that we want, that brand new car, let's say, or that pair of shoes, like, oh, that would be really cool. You're daydreaming about it. And when you're daydreaming, you're releasing dopamine. You're just like, oh, that would be so good. By the time you acquire it, when you actually purchase it, the dopamine stops. And it's like, and so ever notice when you buy something, no matter how much you wanted it, after you buy it, you're like, yeah, it's okay. This is why. This is what's happening in your brain. However, when you take an incredible trip, or there was this incredible, like you've gone to a concert, or you've gone to a game, and you've gone with friends, and whenever you recall that experience, you still feel good about it. It energizes you, because you're still dreaming, you're still daydreaming. And so whenever you recall it, the dopamine is still there. And so when you have an experience and you purchase something, the dopamine drops. When you have a trip or something that engages you and lets you just linger in the moment, your dopamine will just glide. And it turns out when you're generous, it follows the same curve as experiences. So the generosity curve and the experiential curve is one that lingers. So Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's a behavioral economist, which is an area that applies to the work that I do as well. And he actually came up with a number on happiness, actually. He said $80,000 in this society, in the US, relative to inflation and such. But that anything above 80 for the most part doesn't make a happier life. Like you could have $200,000, you could have $500,000. You could believe that you're happier, but in actual studies, you're not actually happier. As long as you're not in poverty, you have the means within you at $80,000 to engage your life with friends, where you still rely on your own ability, but you live within your means, and you are as happy as someone who has $200,000 or $300,000, who just has different things in their life, but for the most part, their emotional ability, the quality of their living, their extension and quality of social circle is not greater than someone who has more money. So that's quite profound. In the happiness studies, they have shown that there are 5 key factors. That you need your health, because if you're dead, you can't be happy. Friends matter. We're highly social creatures, and research has shown that if, for example, with mammals, if they're denied touch, they die. Depression sets in, stress. So friends, our social network is very, very important. Love. So we have our friends, but love is a whole other level. And finding love, finding someone else that accepts you and loves you is profound. 4th one surprised me, work. The thing that we do for our careers, that it's important we get validated in that. So wherever we spend our days working, that environment needs to validate us. Like we need to feel that our contributions matter, and that the people we work with, that we want to work with, and that we validate them. So that was truly surprising for me. However, all those things did add up, because it was these things and the very last thing, when I started to get involved at a whole other level, that significantly changed my perspective. The very last thing was to be part of something that's bigger than you, where you don't matter in a way, where you need to participate, and it's something that's good for the world, but it's bigger than you. And there's something about participating in something that's so large, so meaningful, And something that perhaps you can't even comprehend, but that participating within it matters to you. And so that's when I spent a year at Google. They support 20% time, and in that 20%, I basically volunteered with a nonprofit 20% of the time. And that year of volunteering, one day out of every week, just being entrenched in that, and then joining that nonprofit and working with water sustainability in Africa. That was huge for me because I had the validation at work. I had someone who was close to me, friends, was reasonably healthy. And I was approaching the state of bliss, and it was incredible. And I was like, this is awesome. So those 5 things are 5 keys. And I want to just leave that there. There's so much more I wish I could share, like absolutely everything that was in the spring, but I just wanted to leave it there because these are some of the most insightful things that I've understood, that we're not prisoners to maybe how we've grown up. We're not prisoners to our society or our position. That we have abilities that far exceed words and language, that we can perceive things in each other, that we communicate every day with each other, our intentions, and the things that we believe in. And when we believe in each other, it shows. And when you have friendships or teams or organizations or environments that have that trust, that have that faith in one another, it's no longer words. Trust and faith are no longer words. For me, as a biologist, and having worked with neuroscientists and behavioral economists, it's what we do. There's a science behind it. We're expressing things. If we slowed the tape of our lives down, if we slowed the video of our lives down, we would see that we've always been communicating the things that happen around us, and like that the signals have been there. And so that's kind of profound to know that, like, oh, the language is already there. We've never understood it or seen it, but perhaps we've felt it. And so I think sport is one of those things throughout human history where that type of camaraderie has been sort of understood at a deeper level. And with the sciences that have come out, we know in organizational behavior that things can be a little bit more demystified. But just because we've explained them, that maybe the mystery isn't there doesn't mean the wonder and awe isn't there. In fact, there's more. So we're incredible as human beings. We're incredible as groups, and we can accomplish great things together. So I just wanted to share what I've learned, and that all of this as well towards generosity is where I'm applying it. Generosity and empathy, works for us as a species, and as a civilization, and as a society.
Thank you.
We still have more questions, right? And we still have a few minutes. So, how do we overcome personal and professional failure? So, at the very start, I talked about vulnerability. And with compassion and generosity was this whole aspect of mindfulness. And being mindful is about being present and accepting. It's one of the greatest lessons I've learned around mindfulness is not to judge. And I think in society, we've learned that we can judge and can criticize. And we become critical not only of others, but of ourselves. And so that question says to me, I've criticized myself for my personal failures, my professional failures. And that is probably the biggest challenge to overcome. Because as we've seen and as shared, failure is not a bad thing. Failure is an opportunity to learn. So when you go through personal failure or professional failure, how has that become an opportunity to say, what was the lesson there? What can I evolve? What can I try again? And the only thing that prevents that might be shame and embarrassment and fear. But shame, embarrassment, and fear are natural emotions. They're there to tell you that something went wrong. So what could I possibly do? Now, where shame and embarrassment become blockades for you is when we criticize ourselves. But mindfulness says, if I just accept it, if I accept this failure as that's what happened, and if I also forgive myself. And so forgiveness is this whole other state of mindfulness, where you acknowledge that things happened and you move on. And the forgiveness says, it happens, I'm a human being. It can happen to me, it can happen to other people. And when you forgive yourself and are willing to be compassionate to yourself, you actually have the strength to say, okay, what can we do now? So, overcoming personal and professional failure, these things have happened to me in my life as well. And had I succumbed to the embarrassment or shame each time, then I wouldn't be here sitting with you. I wouldn't have found the love of my life. I wouldn't have had a child. It's so hard to believe in yourself, but that's what the challenge of life is. That's what the journey is. So there's another aspect of that. We believe that if we go through failure, that we need to hide that. I shared a personal part in my presentation. So vulnerability is another part. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, it actually allows an empathetic response from the people around you. So biologists know that when someone is embarrassed, that it actually triggers in the brains of the community around them something where they are encouraged to actually forgive the person. So we're wired so that when we are embarrassed, or if we admit to the thing that we fear, the others around us are actually pre-wired to support us. So being vulnerable is not a sign of weakness. Being vulnerable is facing your fear and saying, I'm willing to be strong. And then being mindful and saying, life is this. Because ultimately, we're just bags of water and meat on a giant rock, which is actually a tiny rock flying through the universe, all made of stardust. And like, we exist in the blink of an eye. The things that we care about mean a lot in this moment of existence, and they should mean something, which is why we should mean something to one another. But in the grand scheme of things, we're kind of insignificant, and there's something beautifully liberating about that. So when you think about that, it's like, oh, I did this, but we're just a blink of an eye, and we're just made up of stars that existed, billions and billions of years ago. We're all stardust. We've all sort of evolved from things. So failure can be your friend. Be vulnerable, face your fears, accept, forgive, and learn the possibilities. Which has been your biggest challenge with respect to your business, and how do you mitigate risk? I think mitigating, so that's an interesting question. I think very quickly, it's about camaraderie and trust and team. So the biggest challenge for me has always been making sure the team feels empowered, because I've seen styles of leadership where someone is a totalitarian and rules through fear, essentially. And when someone tries to foster fear, not actually encourage people to face their fears, you create an environment of distrust. And so whenever there's an environment of distrust, it doesn't last, because life is hard, as we all know. And if you're going to work harder and longer, you need to be able to trust one another, because you get to points of exhaustion, and the only things that will pull you out of that exhaustion is again that belief and empathy, and the empathy that we have for one another is about being generous. When you're generous with each other's time, when you believe in each other, you know that other person has been there for you, you'll be there for them. That's an environment of trust. So to mitigate risk for me has always been taking sometimes the riskier road of allowing my team to be able to decide even if I feel differently. But they need to experience what it is to be able to be empowered by that responsibility. What are the most important factors about designing UI for a mobile app versus a website? Okay, so this is very technical, but I will make it very non-technical. 2 words, snacking and lingering. And so if you're going to design a mobile app versus a website, websites are for reference, and websites require connectivity. So websites are for very quick reference of information, and they work very well. But if you need longer engagement in something, that's when you need a mobile app. Because the 2 words snacking, we love to snack, but nibble on things. But we snack emotionally, we snack intellectually. Which is why when we're using a lot of apps that we do, throughout the day, we'll go back to that. Snacking happens whether it's food or something that happens through engagement intellectually and emotionally. And so mobile apps that have an experience that need to be persistent, where the interactions are more diverse, more complex, are the ones that succeed. And mobile apps that actually allow you to snack, not where like you have to be there all the time, but where you can come in, experience a little bit, and come back out. These are the mobile apps that tend to do better. And so when designing a mobile app versus a website, those are the considerations you should have. Please say a few words about predictive analytics in coaching. So this is a very interesting question. Predictive analytics. So certainly in the Bay Area in California, there are a lot of startups that use big data, Google being one of them, Uber being another one of them. So I know a number of individuals at Uber, and their engineers came to speak, and they were sharing a number of things. So their predictive analytics are so good because people think they're a driving company, but they're actually a predictive analytics company. And they know from the patterns of calls for cars whether the baseball team SF Giants are going to win or lose. So they know better than Vegas actually, and they know that they know better than Vegas. And they have been housing and amassing data around human behavior and what it means and what it predicts. And so naturally it's great for their business, whether it's for events or concerts or just mapping the optimum placement of cars. Predictive analytics can help. Now, predictive analytics and coaching. So that's a very interesting question because I don't know enough about coaching, but I know about guiding and mentoring. And if you're going to guide and mentor, it's important to have as many tools as possible, but it's also dangerous to rely on one tool. So predictive analytics, for me, also understanding human behavior, is it only works if the conditions are the same. So predictive analytics should be a tool that you can use to expand your knowledge, to be able to expand your own intuition and ability to say, what should we do here? But predictive analytics as something that can replace coaching, I don't think it's possible for me, myself, because as human beings, there's another thing that happens. Because predictive analytics exists, you can also mess with the equation by messing with human behavior. So if you change human behavior, you change the outcomes. And I think this is where the human factor comes in as a coach. So the expectations you have actually set a precedent. People believe in your expectations. So the idea of like a Pied Piper, or what we talk about micro expressions. If a coach isn't believing that a play will work, if a coach isn't believing that their players can accomplish something, they won't. That expectation is already communicated. And so um, it's about, again, having full faith and ability, because whether you realize it or not, unless you're a psychopath, you will actually communicate those micro expressions. And that's actually an interesting thing. Psychopaths actually can control the micro expressions. Are millennials better at learning by doing? If so, why? I believe so. A lot of research has gone into understanding millennials. We call them Gen Z, 18 to 24, 28, or even bound to 38, but having the mindset within that. So Gen Z, for the most part, and in the Bay Area, a lot of startups look at Gen Z as well. Gen Z tends to be less trusting of large government organizations and bodies, that they've relied more on themselves and more on experience, more on they believe that that actually innovation comes through people banding together, and that the older ways of believing things like investments or buying a home or settling down or owning a car is not the way to go. And this is the same culture that has given rise to a lot of the car sharing cultures, the home sharing cultures, Airbnbs, Ubers, Zipcar. And living in the Bay Area, I've seen all these birth and come to life. And my hipster communities just embrace them. And it's just, but yes, they are not because of their age, they are because of society. Society and economics have changed. The conditions of the world have changed. And these individuals see a world that environmentally is in trouble and challenged. They see the economy challenged. So they've learned to rely on themselves. And when you rely on yourself and each other, you develop a different sense of trust. And so their trust is in actually experiencing things and relying on each other. And when you rely on each other, it is truly being experiential. So one of the reports around nonprofits in general actually show millennials are more engaged around social behavior and peer behavior. That their preference is to experience life by experiencing life rather than anyone telling them what life is. And those were all the questions.
Do we have any other questions, Peter? A lot of food.
We can share my email, and so please feel free to email me. Like if there's anything around behavioral economics, neuroscience, biology, or even advertising that's gone into this. Like sex, fame, fortune, and power is what advertisers use. And as a creative director, we always sold sex, fame, fortune, and power. And I've been the creative director on selling BMWs or electronic arts and video games. But they work because these, as a biologist, I know that every creature exemplifies its best traits for survivability. It wants to mate. So like in certain birds, it's like the bright colors of feathers. For us as human beings, as primates in this society, our traits of success tend to be seen as sex, fame, fortune, and power. And so when we use these tools in advertising, it's because we're triggering sort of like evolutionary aspects of how we're wired. It's not that sex, fame, fortune, and power are truly the symbols of success, but at least for society, we've seen them as ideas of success. So as long as we believe they are, these become evolutionary advantages in terms of mating, because like it's all, for biologists, it all comes down to mating. It's like, I want to mate with you, so I need to see that you're more powerful, or you're more sexy, or you're more famous. But for those of us who can get beyond sex, fame, fortune, and power, it can actually get to a place that's more fulfilling, because we'll understand ourselves and we'll understand what we need from a partner in life, or a community, or a group. So Every time advertising tries, since you can entertain sex, fame, fortune, power like they're awesome things, but they're not the things that make you happy, and they're just illusions. And illusions are things that we can, get past.
Thank you. My husband read me a quote the other day from Warren Buffett, and it was along the lines of the difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people almost never say yes. And I don't know about Warren Buffett, and I don't really know about really successful people, but I personally feel that really happy people tend to say yes more than no. So thank you, Peter, for saying yes and coming to Lausanne.
Thank you.
And being with us. So on behalf of everybody here, on behalf of everybody on YouTube land, thank you. And Nukuku?
Nkuku, or Zikomo.
Zikomo.
I don't have any chickens to offer.
Thank you, and I know that we're just running a little bit behind schedule. You guys have the day to conquer. So
yeah, thank you for being here. I know you have busy lives. I just learned that it wasn't, I thought I was speaking with the grads, but learning that you're the alumni, I was like, oh, you have lives. I'm taking you from it.
Yeah, speaking about social bonding and touching whatever, can we take a selfie, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.